Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian from the Association of the United States Army's annual conference and trade show in Washington, D.C., and we've got with us Tom Greco, who is the G2, or the Chief Intelligence Officer for the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much, Vago. I'm happy to be here.
And he's actually quite good at speaking Armenian as well, but that's besides the point. Right now it's among the most interesting periods in terms of there's great power competition with near-peer competitors. They're adversaries. They're friends on some things and important for other things. China for trade, Russia to get a lot of other problems solved. But again, adversarial relationships. You have transnational terrorism that you're looking at. As a career intel officer, a guy who served with General Petraeus in Iraq as well, but also in the Balkans and elsewhere, do you feel that we have the visibility for the kinds of challenges that we face and that we're being clear-eyed enough about them so that we can build the doctrine and the strategies to best and most properly train the troops for tomorrow's challenges?
So within Training and Doctrine Command, our responsibility is to prepare troops for the next battle, or the next mission, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years from now. So when we look in terms of what potential future threats that we'd have to consider, we really look at 5 different entities. So we look at the kinds of capabilities that the Russians are creating, the kinds of capabilities that the Chinese have, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and then we look at violent ideological extremists like Hezbollah or ISIS or what's left of Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. So we actually work in very close conjunction with not just the intelligence community, but academia, industry, and other thought leaders to put together what we call the future operational environment. What are the conditions the Army is going to face, whether it deploys tomorrow or 10 years from now?
And do you feel that that picture is accurate enough from your perspective, having surveyed all of the information that's available?
So, of course, there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, but based upon the kinds of things that we've seen, but more importantly, the kinds of things that we anticipate. So look, for example, at what we've seen with what's going on in the Ukraine. So we've noticed that the Russians and the separatists are able to dominate the air from the ground by using a very robust air defense umbrella. And that's something that we hadn't seen before, but we had anticipated. There are a number of other capabilities that the Russians have not yet demonstrated. We haven't seen them use their airborne forces. They haven't had to use their advanced anti-tank missiles. There's a number of capabilities, nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. So there are other capabilities that we know are within the arsenals of other countries, like the Russians, for example, that we've not seen demonstrated, but we can anticipate we'll see in the future.
Do you, during the Cold War, the U.S. Military spent an enormous amount of time translating all of the doctrinal works that the Russians had put out, and they were fairly prolific. The Chinese are even more prolific in putting stuff out. And some folks in the community have sort of said that, look, we're not doing as good of a job translating some of these materials, because, for example, I understand politically that we have to say we don't know what the intent is, but then there are those who say, look, when you read the Chinese documentation, some of which the Chinese are all too eager for us to see, there is intent there. Do you think we're doing a good enough job to translate and to disseminate this wealth of information, which is one of the things that TRADOC used to do so well throughout the Cold War?
And that's a great question, because quantity has a quality all its own, right? But the key thing for us is, what are the things that we need to know about potential adversaries so that we have the right capabilities, build the right equipment, train the troops the right way, or have the right operational concepts and doctrine to support them in the future. So we, in fact, have within TRADOC the Foreign Military Studies Office, which is keyed in on those kinds of capabilities that we are most concerned about in anticipating of where adversaries or potential adversaries are going in the future. So the long answer is, we're not looking at everything we used to look at, but we have a pretty high level of confidence that we're seeing enough that we can anticipate where potential capabilities are going in the future.
What is the key, from your standpoint, to sort of assimilate lessons and very quickly spin that out into a new doctrine, right? You guys, for example, when you were in Iraq, that was like almost a daily thing where
Absolutely.
Lessons were being pulled in. Were some of the lessons that were learned there applicable to, for example, in the event that, God forbid, something happens with the Russians, but the Russians then unveil some capabilities that we didn't expect, to get that cycle time of reaction up?
So, for example, JIATO was great. We would see a new IED and then we would figure out what the countermeasures were, but we were always on the wrong side of the bang. Where we're trying to go is to get on the right side of the bang so that we can anticipate the capability before it actually hits. So let's take, for example, what we're seeing in Yemen. The Houthis are using some very advanced anti-tank guided missiles we've not seen anywhere else in the world. We're using that as a basis to anticipate what kinds of capabilities we're going to need to protect our troops in the future.
Do you, is there, and those are Russian anti-tank systems?
There's actually it's a veritable potpourri of capabilities. It's almost like the Spanish Civil War, where a lot of, we see this in a lot of theaters, where you see capabilities. The ISIS is using off-the-shelf technologies as well as Russian capabilities and things that they're buying on the open market. You have this free transfer of weapons and capabilities. When I was a young officer, we owned the night. Now you can buy night sights at just about any hunting store. So the monopoly that states used to have on military capabilities is no longer extant. There are actually non-state actors who have state-like capabilities.
As a defense thinker, as you look at the third offset strategy, which is one of the priorities for Secretary Work, obviously the Innovation Initiative is part of that, the Strategic Capabilities Office feeds into that also, but then there's also the intellectual work that everybody's doing. As somebody who's looked at the battle space for so long and an evolving battle space and participated in it, what do you see as some of the key elements of a third offset strategy that is nascent and still developing?
So we have a program called Mad Scientists, and the purpose of Mad Scientists is to reach out to those folks who the Department of Defense wouldn't ordinarily talk to. And I guess I would bin the capabilities that we're really interested in a couple of categories. First is, where is computer science and artificial intelligence going? The second is, how are we going to enhance human performance, whether it be through diet, exercise, training, or through the use of prosthetics or other kinds of capabilities. And then the last part would be man-machine interface. How do you improve? So if you're a Vago, the helicopter pilot, you're an attack aviation pilot, and you've got a swarm of drones that work with you. How do you control those? How do you control those drones using artificial intelligence, so you don't have to give a conscious order to those drones? They know what you want to accomplish, and they can execute missions using autonomy. So those are the kinds of things in the distant future that we're looking at.
Tom, thank you for flattering me, because I've always wanted to be a helicopter pilot. So being a hotshot Army attack helicopter pilot makes me feel really, really cool.
Everybody does.
Yeah, who doesn't? Pretty much every job in the U.S. military is cool in its own way. So it's sort of like a hard time choosing. But from a training standpoint, right? I mean, one of the important things you guys do is to structure the training exercises. How is the thinking, the nature of the exercises changing to prepare troops for the future that remembers the hardships and the complexities of the counterinsurgency world, but as well gets back into the high intensity side of it? Although General Petraeus would tell you, all of our operations were pretty high intensity, even if they were counterinsurgency.
If you're getting shot at, the intensity is pretty high. So actually, the Army can't be a boutique force. We can't just do low intensity or counterinsurgency or just high intensity. We have to be prepared for the full range of missions. That's what the nation demands. So we can't just rest on our experience. We have a very combat seasoned force right now, but the next war is going to look very different from anything we've done the last 15 years. So, for example, if you did 2 tours in Iraq changed from one year to the next. Or if you did Iraq and then Afghanistan, they were very different problem sets. Based upon what we're seeing in places like Syria, places like Iraq, based upon places like Yemen, and the capabilities we know adversaries have that we haven't seen demonstrated, we're anticipating that we have to be able to prepare the Army for the full range, the full spectrum of missions, both combined arms maneuver as well as wide area security.
And let me ask you one last question about Syria. What are the takeaways from Syria? Because there was a sense that Bashar al-Assad was doomed to collapse. That the Russian intervention would be unsuccessful, and it's seemed not to be the case. But what, from a raw military standpoint, what are some of the lessons to learn from that?
So we've seen the Russians do some things in Syria that we'd never seen them do before. We've seen them do combined joint fires where they used rockets as well as air power. We've seen them now, they've put some advanced air defense systems into Syria. We've seen them do some things with their base defense. So we're seeing a level of sophistication in the Russians' capabilities that they haven't had to display in the Ukraine, which we actually anticipated that they would have. So it's actually they've not necessarily surprised us, but they have impressed us.
Sir, thanks very much, and look forward to having a regular series of conversations with you on this stuff, and as well as picking up on Armenian a little bit.
Well, and thank you for your time.